Imagine you are caught in like a massive storm.
Okay.
The wind is howling, you are freezing, and suddenly you find this high-tech reinforced bunker.
Oh, wow. A total lifesaver.
Right. So you lock the heavy steel door behind you, you are safe. The storm can't touch you. But a few days in, you notice the air is getting a little thin.
Uh-oh. It's never good.
Yeah, and then you notice the control panel for the door. It only works on the outside.
Oh, man. So you haven't actually found a sanctuary at all.
Exactly. You have locked yourself inside a vacuum. And whoever built it is, slowly siphoning out your oxygen.
It is that horrifying realization that the very architecture of your safety was actually designed for your containment.
Yes. And that pivot from salvation to absolute suffocating captivity is what we are plunging into today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
I know you're here because you want to get thoroughly informed, you want the multiple perspectives, and you are hunting for those aha moments without having to sift through a mountain of media yourself.
Exactly. And today, we have a massive stack of sources to go through.
We really do. We've got detailed character profiles, episode breakdowns, clinical psychology reviews, and of course, the fandom critiques.
All centered on the 2026 Thai series yesterday. And just to set the tone, we are definitely not looking at a standard romance story here.
No, definitely not.
This series operates as a psychological thriller. It dissects these really severe power dynamics. Our mission today is to pull apart why this specific dark romance became such a lightning rod for debate.
Right, because it really did divide people.
It did. We are exploring how trauma actively turns victims into perpetrators, which makes this an absolutely fascinating case study in narrative psychology.
Because yesterday isn't pulling any punches, is it?
Not at all.
It's tackling obsessive love, generational cycles of abuse, and making this highly controversial shift from, well, toxic fiction to clinical accountability.
Yeah, we're going to explore how a relationship built on a fundamental lie completely unravels.
To understand the show's incredibly intense climax, we have to start at its foundation. And that means looking at a massive power reversal.
Right, the setup.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right.
The series uses a non-linear timeline, constantly jumping between the past and the present.
Mm-hmm.
In the past timeline, we meet Ver, played by Fort Thidipon. He is the powerful, wealthy heir of the VPG group. And he decides to act as a savior to this young man named Kelvin.
Played by Pete Wasserman, right.
Exactly. Kelvin is the neglected, heavily bullied second son of a rival corporate empire, the King Group. Okay, so think of it this way. It's like adopting a stray dog, only to realize years later you've actually brought home a wolf that's been studying the locks on your doors.
That is a terrifying but very accurate analogy. Ver steps in to shield Kelvin from the brutal reality of his own family.
Which was really bad.
Specifically, he protects him from Kelvin's ruthless half-brother, Ken. Ver provides Kelvin with an elite lifestyle, political backing, and a safe haven. He effectively becomes the bunker in your opening analogy.
Shielding Kelvin from the abuse. But then the present timeline completely shatters that dynamic.
It flips it entirely.
Ver's company goes bankrupt. He loses all his corporate armor. And the next thing we know, Kelvin is chloroforming Ver at an airport and kidnapping him.
Yeah, that scene is wild.
It really is. It reminds me of the strangler fig tree in the rainforest. It starts as this fragile little vine that needs a massive host tree just to survive, to reach the sunlight.
Right, but once it gets strong enough.
Once it gets strong enough, it fuses around the host, slowly crushing it to death, and takes its place. So how does the show execute this flip so convincingly?
Well, what's fascinating here is the underlying psychological mechanism driving Kelvin. The clinical terms thrown around in the character analyses are compensatory narcissism paired with a fearful avoidant attachment style.
Okay, let's break down what that actually means for his behavior.
Sure. So someone with a fearful avoidance style desperately craves intimacy, but they are utterly terrified of vulnerability. They anticipate betrayal.
Because Kelvin grew up completely powerless.
Right. Exactly. Completely powerless and emotionally starved under his half-brother. So he cannot trust organic affection. Instead of waiting for it, he preempts the betrayal.
He decides the only way to ensure Ver never leaves him is to remove Ver's ability to leave.
You got it. He equates love with total dominance.
Wow.
Ver ceases to be a human partner with free will and basically becomes a possessed object. And that is where the compensatory narcissism comes in.
And the grandiosity we see in Kelvin in the present timeline.
Right. It's a massive, impenetrable shell covering this deep, deep void of inferiority.
And the visual storytelling really leans into that shell, too. Like, in the past, Kelvin is this shy, stuttering, vulnerable guy.
Yeah, he seems so harmless.
But when we see him in the present at the airport, right before the kidnapping, Kelvin is wearing this striking, immaculately tailored red tuxedo.
The red tuxedo is such a brilliant visual cue. It signals to the audience that the nerdy, fragile younger brother was, at least in part, a calculated facade.
It's the armor of his narcissism.
Precisely. The real Kelvin is a deeply complex, unstable, and highly dangerous persona.
And the sources show how the writers drop hints that Kelvin was always building this trap.
Oh, the foreshadowing is great.
There's this fantastic flashback to a fencing practice. Kelvin and Ver are sparring, and Kelvin casually tells Ver, "Patience catches the big fish."
Chilling in retrospect.
So chilling. And later, we see a memory where Kelvin is sitting at a bar, intentionally waiting to approach Ver. He's actively calculating that staying away will make Ver desire him more.
So he was playing a long game.
He really was. Kelvin wasn't just a passive victim waiting for a hero. He was playing a long game of obsession. He weaponized Ver's own kindness.
And that leads directly to the core conflict of the series. Kelvin uses his own genuine trauma to justify his cruelty.
Right.
He creates this twisted cognitive loop where he genuinely believes he is saving Ver from the dangers of the corporate world by locking him away.
Completely ignoring the reality that he, Kelvin, is the danger.
Exactly. And that psychology completely dictates the method of the kidnapping. Kelvin doesn't just throw Ver in a damp, dirty dungeon.
No, it's not like that at all. The show relies on a trope called the golden cage.
Right, the golden cage.
Kelvin provides Ver with luxury, expensive meals and meticulous medical care. But he removed the door handles. It's an environment designed to inflict psychological tension rather than physical violence.
It's the weaponization of care. By controlling Ver's access to the outside world, to food, to basic movement, Kelvin forces Ver into a state of infantile dependency.
And this is where the sources rave about the character of Ver. He fits the profile of the resilient survivor.
He really does.
In so many dark romance narratives, the captive eventually breaks down or falls in love with the captor relatively early, your classic Stockholm Syndrome. But Ver doesn't submit.
No, he exhibits active, constant resistance.
He remains mentally sharp. He's not a victim cowering in a corner. He's more like a hacker, constantly looking for an exploit in a closed operating system.
And he's battling intense cognitive dissonance while doing it. Ver remembers the sweet Kelvin from the past.
Yeah, that must be so confusing for him.
It is. He struggles to reconcile that memory with the unstable architect of his current prison. That makes his hatred for Kelvin deeply personal, complex, and agonizing.
Let's talk about the specific scenes the critics highlighted, because they illustrate this without needing massive action sequences.
Oh, for sure. Which one stood out?
Well, in episode 3, there's a scene in the basement that went totally viral. It's known as the sausage scene.
Yes, the sausage scene.
It sounds absurd out of context. But Kelvin uses this mundane object, a sausage, to demonstrate his absolute control. He dictates exactly when, how, and if Ver eats.
It's terrifying.
Without spilling a single drop of blood, Kelvin strips Ver of his bodily autonomy. It is deeply unsettling.
And it builds right up to that emotional peak in episode 5.
Right, when Kelvin discovers an old phone that proves Ver actually bankrupted his own company to protect Kelvin's secrets in the past.
Kelvin just breaks down, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. And Ver just looks at him and delivers this devastating line. "You didn't just lock me in a room, you killed the version of me that loved you."
That line is a masterclass in reclaiming agency. It refuses to romanticize the captivity.
It really does.
Ver takes the moral high ground. He stops being the captive and becomes the judge, pointing out that Kelvin's obsession fundamentally destroyed the very intimacy he was trying to forcefully preserve.
Okay, but hold on. Here's where it gets really interesting.
I know where you're going with this.
If Ver is this brilliant hacker in a closed system, constantly resisting, then I have a massive problem with episode 7.
The truth serum scene.
Yes. The evil half-brother, Ken, captures both of them. Ken injects Ver with the truth serum to extract corporate codes, but under the influence of this drug, Ver confesses that he still has deep, lingering feelings for the old Kelvin.
Yeah.
Doesn't this forced emotional hack completely ruin Ver's agency?
That is the flashpoint of the entire series.
Yeah.
I won't disagree with your frustration, and neither did the fandom.
It feels like a cheat code. It functions exactly like one. From a narrative standpoint, the writers clearly wanted an unfiltered honesty mechanism to prove their bond was still there.
But it feels so unearned.
A vocal segment of viewers tore this scene apart, calling it a lazy plot device. The writers spent 6 episodes building an incredibly complex psychological standoff based on free will and resistance.
And then they just bypass it.
Exactly. Using a chemical to force a love confession from a captive bypasses all that hard-earned narrative tension. It robs the character of his autonomy just to expedite a team-up.
Because right after that forced confession, they do team up against the real villain. Which means we need to look at the environment that manufactured Kelvin's psychology in the first place.
We have to look outside the golden cage.
Right. We have to talk about Ken.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Ken is the true north of villainy in this story. The clinical analyses categorize him as a high-functioning sociopath driven by pure Machiavellianism.
He's basically a Nepo baby bankrolled by his father's empire. But what does Machiavellianism actually look like in his behavior?
In psychological terms, it means Ken approaches all human relationships strictly as transactional data. He lacks the capacity for empathy.
He just doesn't care.
He views human beings as faulty hardware that needs to be reprogrammed for his benefit or discarded entirely.
So different from Kelvin.
Very different. While Kelvin is driven by a twisted, trauma-fueled desperation for love, Ken is driven by cold, calculated ambition. Ken represents the toxic legacy of the King Group.
He is the terrifying mirror, showing the audience exactly what Kelvin will become if he completely loses his capacity for empathy.
That Ken's arrogance is ultimately his downfall.
And it doesn't come from Kelvin or Vare, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from the women in this series who completely break the typical genre molds.
Oh, absolutely.
Usually in these dark romance shows, female characters are sidelined as matchmakers, tragic victims, or just bystanders. Not here. First, we have Nana.
Right, the restaurant owner.
From Chiang Mai. She befriended Vera while he was on the run. When Vera is captured by Ken, Nana doesn't just sit by the phone.
She takes action.
She uses her connections to orchestrate a highly tactical private security raid on Ken's facility.
She responds to Ken's systemic violence with structural, organized force.
And then there's Laughlin, Ken's abused wife. She seems like a pawn for the first half of the show, but she secretly becomes a triple agent.
Her character arc is amazing.
It is. She runs a quiet, corporate espionage campaign, leaking information to Nana. Eventually, during a high-stakes board meeting, Laughlin openly defects.
She drops undeniable evidence.
Right on the table. Evidence of Ken's embezzlement and his illegal detention of Vare. She completely dismantles the King Group legally.
The alliance between Nana and Laughlin is brilliant because it highlights a powerful theme of structural dismantling versus physical violence.
Yes.
These two women have survived the destructive wake of unchecked male egos, but instead of engaging in a bloody shootout, they band together and use intellect, the law, and tactical precision to take down the antagonists.
They prove that survival isn't just about enduring abuse.
It's about systematically destroying the structures that allow the abuse to happen.
It is incredibly satisfying to watch. And their legal dismantling of Ken's empire forces Kelvin into a corner where he has to make a massive choice.
This brings us to episode 9.
Right. Kelvin corners Ken in the archives, the very room where their childhood trauma began. Kelvin is on the edge of a psychotic break, holding a weapon about to brutally murder his brother.
But Vare steps in.
Vare tells Kelvin that if he kills Ken, he confirms every terrible thing his family ever said about him. He becomes the monster. And Kelvin actually listens.
He puts the weapon down.
He lets Ken face Leyland's legal justice.
Which is the pivotal moment of transcendence. Kelvin makes the active choice to break the generational cycle of violence. He stops being a perpetrator.
And that single choice splits the television show entirely away from its original source material.
Yes, the adaptation choices here are wild.
We need to zoom out for a second and look at the actual ethics of adaptation, because Yesterday is based on a Chinese web novel by an author named Feng Nong.
Originally translated as Scars of Days Gone By, right?
That's the one. And the book and the show exist in two entirely different ethical universes.
The original novel leans completely into the tragedy of the obsession. There is no psychological recovery.
It's an endless cycle of madness. In the book, Vare's spirit completely shatters. His choice to stay with Kelvin isn't born of mature reconciliation.
It's genuine textbook Stockholm Syndrome.
Exactly. He accepts his life as a high-class prisoner because his psychological resistance has been entirely eroded. And Ken doesn't go to jail.
No, Kelvin brutally, violently murders him.
The book ends on this incredibly claustrophobic note, suggesting these two men are trapped in a poisonous circle of pain forever.
This raises an important question about how creators adapt toxic fiction for modern television audiences.
Because they changed it drastically.
The producers of the show made a highly deliberate pivot away from that poisonous circle. In the television finale, episode 10, Kelvin doesn't just ride off into the sunset with his captive.
Thank goodness.
The narrative forces clinical accountability. Kelvin achieves a moment of profound self-awareness, realizing his mind is dangerously broken.
So he voluntarily checks himself into a psychiatric facility.
Yes. He gets formally diagnosed with bipolar disorder and receives treatment for his trauma-induced obsessive tendencies. He even legally signs over his remaining assets to Ver as restitution.
And Ver actually gets his power back. Ver regains his CEO status. The show jumps forward 6 months, and they reunite.
But crucially, they don't reunite in a locked basement.
No, they meet on a neutral beach, the open ocean.
Yep.
They agree to start over as two people who finally know the terrifying truth about each other.
It shifts the entire narrative from a romanticized kidnapping to a story about medical accountability and mental health recovery.
By giving the story a moral compass,
Yeah.
the creators are arguing that trauma is an explanation, but it is never an excuse.
Right. Kelvin has to seek clinical treatment and face his psychological demons before he is even remotely worthy of a partnership. His definition of love has to evolve past possession.
Now, the fandom reception to this pivot was intensely polarized.
I can imagine.
On one hand, critics and fans universally praised Pete Wassuthorn's acting. His ability to convey Kelvin's inner psychological war was hailed as a masterclass.
It really was an incredible performance.
Many viewers appreciated that the show didn't just gloss over the abuse with a spicy romance scene to make the fans happy.
But not everyone was on board.
Right. There was a very vocal segment of viewers who felt the foundation was simply too corrupted to salvage. They argued that a relationship built on kidnapping, assault, and forced proximity is entirely too dark for any kind of romantic reconciliation.
Even with a 6-month rehab arc.
Exactly. They felt that Ver, choosing to stay with Kelvin, even on a sunny beach, still carried the lingering, uncomfortable shadow of Stockholm Syndrome.
It asks the audience to weigh two very heavy concepts against each other.
What do you mean?
Well, the genuine weight of clinical redemption versus the unforgivable weight of severe systematic abuse.
So what does this all mean? When we strip away the red tuxedos, the viral scenes, and the corporate espionage, what we find in Yesterday is a highly demanding narrative.
It really is.
It's a series that proves the dark romance genre doesn't just have to rely on shock value. It can tackle incredibly heavy mechanisms, the suffocating cycle of abuse, the cold calculus of corporate sociopathy, and the deeply painful, unglamorous path of clinical recovery.
It takes characters who are completely morally gray and forces them to stare into the mirror and account for their actions.
And it highlights a significant evolution in media consumption.
It does. You, as a listener and a viewer, are no longer satisfied with trauma being used merely as a convenient plot device to make a character edgy or brooding.
Audiences want more.
Modern audiences demand to see the psychological fallout. They demand to see the messy, difficult work of accountability that must follow the trauma.
The show understands that while you cannot erase the yesterday of your pain, you have to take structural, clinical responsibility for how it shapes your today.
Perfectly said.
Which brings us back to that bunker we talked about at the beginning. When you realize the walls designed to protect you are actually designed to control you, breaking the lock is only the first step.
The real challenge is what happens after you step outside.
Right. Do you destroy the person who built the trap? Or do you demand they fix the broken psychology that made them build it in the first place? Yesterday asks us to look at the monster and see the broken person underneath. But I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our trauma writes the script for our darkest actions, at what point does understanding a villain's deeply tragic backstory cross the line into excusing the unforgivable?
That is a lot to think about. Thank you for joining us as we navigated the intricate and shadowy world of Yesterday. We hope this exploration provided the depth and insight you were looking for.
Keep questioning the stories you consume, look past the surface, and we'll be right here waiting to unpack the next one with you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next one.